Bill Connolly, ESPN's Bill Connolly, he's the one that does the returning production ratings and all those things. He came out after the Florida State debacle against Boston College. He came out with a piece that was mostly about Florida State, but then he also went through and picked who he believes is going to win each conference after kind of an overreaction to the very first weekend of college football, or I guess the second weekend after, a small weekend before that, but after week one. And he picks Penn State to win the Big Ten. He says, quote, Penn State played what was supposed to be a challenging week one game, and only Penn State finished week one unchallenged. Now, he goes into it. He talks a little bit about how Ohio State, Michigan, and Oregon did not perform very well. All of them kind of lost their seat at the top, and he believes that Penn State is the top team. He did not really comment much on USC, which was a little strange to me. I feel like they have some conversation there. But Zach, what were your thoughts with Bill Connolly picking Penn State to win the Big Ten after week one?
He said that no team was unchallenged except Penn State. I was at the Ohio State Akron game. I think Ohio State's biggest challenge was Ohio State. I don't think Akron challenged them. I think
don't think so either.
Yeah, I think I can understand you saying, "Oh, Ohio State didn't look very good in that first quarter and a half."
I could understand saying like they had a slow start. You expect a faster start by somebody who had all the hype.
Yeah, I'll say it. I think it's a huge overreaction, but I did think Penn State was the most impressive team this weekend. And again, I think people were sleeping on West Virginia and the potential of their quarterback. They made Garrett Green, who I think is going to be pretty good this year. They made him look just awful. And they made that offense look pedestrian when they've got two very good running backs, a good offensive system, again, in a really tough environment. And there were a lot of things I loved about Penn State that were different from a year ago. Two things in particular: Drew Aller, I think, showing a lot of fire and leadership. I mean, off the get-go, he was yelling at a ref, of all things, because of what he thought was unfair play. And I'm like, man, did you see Drew show any emotion a year ago? I thought that was huge. And I know it's a small detail, but I actually thought that was really, really important for the leadership moving forward. And then seeing Connolly dial it up with 2 minutes to go and not turtle into conservative mode. I thought those two things were really telling. The defense is nasty again. And so do I think that Penn State is definitely going to win the Big Ten after this week? No. Do I think that Penn State is one of the three most likely teams to compete for the Big Ten title after this week? Yes.
Because I think those three for you.
Oregon, but I have question marks. Ohio State and Penn State. I think Michigan, they have a quarterback problem. And they would take Cade McNamara in a heartbeat back right now.
See, I put USC up there instead of Oregon after this weekend.
Okay, say more.
Yeah, so I believe USC coming out of this weekend, if you're going to have an overreaction pick to win the Big Ten, let's just take Ohio State out of it for a minute, okay? Let's pretend like Bill Connolly's, whole analysis here, and I know people are disagreeing in the chat. I tend to disagree as well, but for funsies, let's take Ohio State out of it for a second, and let's say the top two options are USC and Penn State. If I had to pick between those two who I believe is going to win the Big Ten, I think USC is the better team, and I think that they should win the Big Ten between the two. I just think Penn State has the better schedule to accomplish that, which for me is kind of, that kind of sucks for USC, because I think USC has the better team based off what we saw this weekend. They were challenged more and they did more to actually show a winning championship pedigree. I agree with you. Penn State showed some things in the West Virginia game, but let's also remember it's West Virginia. I mean, this is Neil Brown, who was going to be fired last year. He had one good year after losing to Penn State because, don't forget, I mean, who was it in here in the chat? Yeah, Billy Tuesday said, didn't OSU, he means PSU, start strong last year against West Virginia. They did, and people were talking about Drew Aller as this great quarterback, and he was going to be fantastic. I mean, he was making throws on the run. He was throwing the ball deep, kind of letting it go a little bit. It was really cool to see. And then we saw that team kind of take their step back after playing Ohio State. And then the loss to Michigan was also very demoralizing, struggling against, I think it was Indiana, they struggled against. That was really difficult for them to take. I don't know. I can see Lincoln Riley getting to the conference championship game as he has done before. I don't think I see James Franklin getting there. Lincoln Riley has been to the playoffs. Lincoln Riley has had Heisman caliber quarterbacks. James Franklin has looked good before and then flopped against better teams. Forgive me, but I just feel like that's what we're going to see with Penn State again, and I don't know if my mind can change until I see it. I only saw it once in 2016. I don't think my mind can change until I see it again.
Yeah, I'll push back a little. I think we're both on the same page. Ohio State's still the favorite, and
Yes.
I don't think they're small favorites in either of our minds either, especially after this week. I think 2016 is actually a really good reference point because I think what James Franklin had then that he has now is an offensive coordinator that can make things happen. And I think my concern with USC, so I would agree with you. I think Lincoln Riley is the better coach, and I think he proved it against LSU. I think if Brian Kelly were a better coach, I think we're probably talking about a USC loss. Because I think their roster is better. And I think they could grow into something for sure. I mean, it's game one, right? So like I think what we saw at a USC, they're not a finished product. But I would be concerned if you had a line even not as good as LSU's, but you actually had a better defense and offense around it. Like I think if USC played Ohio State, I might have, I don't know who I'd pick in that game last week based on how they played, but I'm like, is USC gonna beat Penn State and beat Michigan and I just don't know. And I think you're right. I think the schedule is harder. So I'm like, I think the pathway for USC is harder, and I'm just not sure they can win. I don't know if they can win the same way game in and game out.
Yeah. I think Brian Myers makes a good point here. He says what Franklin had in 2016 is Saquon Barkley. They don't have anyone of that caliber this year. I will say Nick Singleton could possibly be that, but not exactly Saquon Barkley. He could be a version of Saquon Barkley, but I do think that Drew Aller would be a better quarterback. But I mean, I agree they don't have Saquon Barkley, and so that's one of the biggest things that's going to prevent them from doing it this year. And I think ultimately, at the end of the day, even though Penn State has the easier schedule, I just think Lincoln Riley's the better coach. I know people are going to clown him for last year when he went 7-5 or 8-5 because of the bowl game. I know people are going to clown him, and people are going to say, "Oh, he's never won in the playoffs" and that kind of stuff. We're not talking about a playoff win here. We're talking about making the conference championship game, the ability to win the conference championship game. Sure, Lincoln Riley lost to Utah in the conference championship game 2 years ago, but that was also taking over a USC team that had 4 or 5 wins the year before. So, I mean, and that was also with a hurt Caleb Williams. So